we can say, without exaggeration, that the Bolivarian Revolution is the key to the situation of the whole of the struggle throughout Latin America and in the Americas as a whole. I include in that the Caribbean struggles, particularly right now, the Haitian struggle and the inclusion of Haiti in the ALBA alliance. The revolution is opening the door to the consolidation of a new class power in Venezuela, a worker-farmer-based power, through the establishment of what we can call a revolutionary democratic government led by Hugo Chavez and the Chavista movement, which has now set its goal as socialism. Without the Venezuelan Revolution, other struggles, such as the struggle in Bolivia and the Cuban Revolution itself, would be in grave danger. The Venezuelan Revolution is above all an internationalist revolution. The leadership of the revolution do not view the process that they're going through and the struggles that they're going through in an exclusively national framework. Or they do not have the concept of building a national socialism or a socialism in one country. They have the concept of using the power that the revolution has obtained in order to extend the revolutionary process. What are the gains of the revolution so far? In order to gauge and assess the gains of the revolution, it's important to recall what was happening on the eve of the revolution. What happened to Venezuela throughout the 1980s and 1990s when vulture capitalism or neoliberal capitalism, however you want to call it, caught the country in a cycle of downward crises and destruction of the standard of living of the masses of the people of Venezuela. Between in the 1980s and the 1990s, the gross national product of Venezuela fell by 40%. No other South American country suffered such a devastating impact from the imposition of the neoliberal program throughout the continent by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and of course the United States. Real wages fell in the 1990s by 23%, creating a situation where 60% of the workforce were pushed down into a survival existence in what is called the informal economy, and in which poverty and extreme poverty affected over 1/2 of the population. This situation led in 1989, in February of that year, to the Caracazo, an urban insurrectionary situation in which masses of people responded to simple triggers like a rise in the bus fares, the hoarding of food in the supermarket chain despite the enormous hunger throughout the country. These mass demonstrations were attacked by the armed forces and the police. Thousands were killed and wounded, and this set up the beginning of the process of the decomposition and complete incapacity of the Venezuelan bourgeoisie to continue ruling the country. In 1992, Chavez, with a group of revolutionary officers in the army, attempted to stage a coup as a way to respond to this situation. The coup fell, and then, following Chavez's release from jail a couple of years later, Chavez made a visit to Cuba, where he was received by Fidel, and where we can be sure some interesting discussions took place on revolutionary strategy in Venezuela. In any case, the Chavez leadership oriented then towards an electoralist struggle, and through the formation of the Movement for the Fifth Republic, and before that some intermediary organizational forms. And in 1998 won the elections with 56% of the vote. And in the year 2000, a subsequent election after a reform of the Constitution, winning again the presidency with an even higher vote. What is interesting is that in the first couple of years of the Chavista administration, the economic and social conditions of the masses declined. That's because the ruling class reacted to the government with massive capital flight, disruptions of the economy, and so on. But the government, with an orientation to mobilizing masses of people, fought back against the oligarchy and the right-wing parties and began to turn the situation around. The Chavista government and the mass movement in Venezuela have managed to reduce poverty from 55% to 34%. That's no small achievement in a country like Venezuela. Social spending has been increased, doubled, from 7.8 or roughly 8% to 15 to 16% of the gross national product. 1.5 million adults have won literacy, and Venezuela will soon be free of illiteracy, probably by next year. There's been a virtual elimination of hunger through the setting up of subsidized supermarket chains, particularly in the slums, provisioning food to 13 million people, which is nearly 70% of the population. Sorry, 50% of the population. Medical care essentially free is essentially free, with a system of clinics in the slums and rural areas staffed by Cuban doctors. These services are available to 70% of the population at absolutely no charge and are replete with necessary medicines, advanced modern medical technology, and so on. And they are ubiquitous, that is, they're accessible to the poorest sectors of the population in the towns and slums and in much of the rural countryside. Free education and access to higher education exists for the first time for poor people, for workers, blacks, and indigenous people. There's been a special affirmative action program put in motion for indigenous people that it involves indigenous people. It's not a paternalistic program. It involves the indigenous organizations. It's actually a response to proposals from the indigenous movement. Land reform has involved the redistribution of over 9 million acres of land to landless families, not just of state lands, but also of the expropriation of unused or lands that are not being worked by the latifundist owners of the country and some international investors as well. There's been an explosion of the cooperative movement in Venezuela, from about 800 co-ops when Chavez came to the presidency to over 180,000 co-ops. I don't even know how to multiply that out, but that's an enormous change in the character of the especially of the informal sector of the economy and the involvement of poor people and people who are outside of the formal sector of economy in economic activities that generate income for these sectors. There's been a process of ongoing nationalizations, with now the complete nationalization of the oil industry. There's not much left to do there except increase the share of the state much beyond 55-60% and slowly reduce the reliance on foreign investment in that sector. The telephone and power sectors are nationalized. There's open discussion now of renationalizing the steel industry and so on. Since 2003, the economy has increased, economic growth has increased at a rate of 10% per year on average since 2003, and there's no expectation that that rate of growth will slow down. This rate of growth is not only in the oil sector. As a matter of fact, it's mainly accountable for growth in other sectors of the economy. There's a program of support for workers' rights in industry, particularly around issues of health and safety, and there is a official government support for initiatives around workers' control in industry. Now, I could use the whole talk extending this list, but when you think about, these achievements taking place in the framework of major efforts by the local bourgeoisie and by imperialism to crush the revolution, it's simply astounding. The most important gain, however, are not any of the things I've mentioned. The most important gain of all is the drawing of masses of people into the front lines of the revolution and into a greater and greater role in the leadership process at the local level, in the workplaces, and all the way up into national politics. This process of increasing mass participation is expressed not just through elections. If we think about the coup on the 11th, 12th of April 2002 and the mass response to the coup, we really had a form of insurrection. That is, it wasn't just simply masses of people having a protest demonstration. There were tens and tens of thousands of people responding to a military coup in a situation in which they might have been mowed down by military repression. This enormous intervention of the masses, particularly of Caracas, inspired sectors of the army to resist the coup and enabled the coup to be defeated. The coup would not have been defeated had there not been this uprising of the masses and a consequent division in the armed forces and the isolation of the coup wing of the armed forces. The response to the lockout in the oil industry in the latter part of 2002 also involved a mass response and mass participation. In order to deal with the lockout, about 20,000 of the most privileged sectors of the workforce, the technical workforce and so on, of the industry had to be replaced. And the working class, the workers involved who began to run the oil industry, had to learn rapidly how to run that industry. That, too, is a big mass response. We also have the same phenomenon in the recall referendum, and also the same phenomenon in radical changes in the labor movement, with the rise of the National Union of Workers, the UNT, and the displacing of the old Union Federation among the majority of workers in the country. There is, first of all, and this is the most important aspect of its international policy, the axis of alliance with Cuba, with socialist Cuba. This Cuba-Caracas or Cuba-Venezuela axis of leadership, in my opinion, is a thoroughly revolutionary leadership. Some people would quarrel with the characterization of it as a Marxist leadership. I think that's a useless discussion. The leadership is acting consciously to promote the idea of the extension of the socialist revolution in Latin America. Venezuela has set out on a very broad, with a very broad approach and on a very broad level to create throughout Latin America an anti-imperialist alliance of countries that will include not just Venezuela and Bolivia or Cuba, where revolutions are taking place or are being reconsolidated, but will include countries that are clearly not in a revolutionary anti-capitalist process. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, and so on. Now, this is a vital and important aspect of the strategy of the revolution, because there is a movement afoot in Latin America and in other third world countries to overcome the situation of total U.S. domination and to try to create, again, what they call a multipolar world, where countries can develop some breathing space in economic terms and develop trading relations with Europe or with China, with India, and among themselves, that is, in a South-South basis, in trading relations in a Latin American framework. This has led to Venezuela joining the Mercosur, to the establishment of the Bank of the South, to special relations between Venezuela and Ecuador, between Venezuela and Nicaragua, between Venezuela and Haiti, all of this through the ALBA alliance. The ALBA alliance is an alliance based on setting up economic and trade relations between countries based on solidarity rather than the logic of capitalist profit. I've seen the effects of the ALBA alliance in Nicaragua, my country, where the total amount of aid coming from Venezuela through the ALBA in the first year will range from $600 million to $1 billion, where it involves the rebuilding of the health system. It involves the building of a highway to the Caribbean coast, the building of a $2 billion refinery over the next 3 or 4 years, and so on. These kinds of things are becoming possible because of this initiative. And when these kinds of collaboration occur, an enormous educational opening occurs among the masses. In Nicaragua today, as a result of this, the whole issue of the putting back on the agenda the Sandinista revolution has been raised. Through the ALBA, you also have the extension of some of the social programs of the Cuban and Venezuelan revolution, especially in the health area. ALBA is financing the Cuban medical presence, for example, in Bolivia. There is also the extension of the Operación Milagro, which is the eye operation program, is now set up in Argentina, in Paraguay, in Bolivia. There's an extension of it in Brazil, and there's another in Central America based in Nicaragua, where tens and tens of thousands of people are having their sight restored. This is another example of what the ALBA is all about. It's an anti-capitalist alternative to the concept of doing everything through the market, through profit motivation, and through the exploitation of labor. In closing, I simply want to say that I think that the Venezuelan revolution offers the struggle throughout Latin America and more extensively throughout the whole globe of a very fine and inspiring example. The way I like to put it is how I felt in 1959 and 1960 in relation to the Cuban Revolution. That is, this is our revolution. We are part of it. It's not, although it's a revolution that's trying to take Venezuela away from its former position of being a neo-colony into a country that is sovereign and independent and can develop itself and so on. It's national in that framework, but it's above all internationalist. And we are, who are struggling for socialism in our part of the world, we are part of that revolution. And it has a lot to offer in terms of educating us, of inspiring us, and of involving us in even more broader frameworks. So I'll leave it at that.